Have you ever stood before something so ancient, so silent, that it seemed to be watching you? Back? There are places in the world where time doesn't pass. It just accumulates. Invisible layers of memory, intention, and forgetting. Ollantaytambo is one of those places. Not just a set of stones, not just a ruin, but a riddle left open. Like a question that has been waiting for centuries for someone willing to answer. Really listen to her. Imagine yourself walking through the Andean valleys at dawn. The air is rarefied, almost sacred. Mountains don't just surround, they watch. And there, fitted with a precision that defies logic, walls formed by gigantic blocks, carved with a perfection that seems to deny human effort. There is no mortar. There are no flaws visible. Just stone touching stone as if they had always belonged together. Who did this? And why? As children, we learned that ancient civilizations were limited by their tools. Stone hammers, rudimentary chisels, brute strength, and patience. But in the face of these walls, something inside us hesitates. The taught narrative begins to creak, because there is things that the eyes see, but the explanation does not reach. And when that happens, no, we are faced with ignorance. We are faced with an invitation. If you feel, even vaguely, that certain things are no coincidence, maybe this video is exactly what you needed to find today. Not by chance, but for resonance. Ollantaytambo does not shout its secrets. He whispers, and only listen to those who slow down enough to feel. Each megalithic block seems to carry a dormant intention. One knowledge that was not written in books, but recorded in matter. As if those stones were pages of a story that we forgot how to read. Modern science measures, weighs, calculates. And yet it stumbles here. Engineers observe the fittings and admit, reproducing this today would be expensive, complex, almost impractical. Archaeologists offer cautious hypotheses. Historians turn to inherited explanations. But no answer completely comes full circle. Always there is a gap left, an uncomfortable silence, a maybe that echoes. And it is in this empty space that mystery breathes. Perhaps the biggest mistake is not having answers. Maybe it's that we stop doing things right questions. Because civilizations don't just build with hands. They build with vision, with purpose, with something that transcends the urgency of the present. What would motivate a people moving? Stones weighing dozens of tons over steep terrain without wheels, without iron, without clear records. If there wasn't something bigger at stake? Throughout this journey, we won't just talk about rocks. Let's talk about memory. From lost knowledge, of legacies that cross nameless eras. Let's touch the limit between science and spirituality, where reason observes, and the soul recognizes. Stay, not in a hurry, not looking for quick answers, but allowing the enigma work on you. Because sometimes we are not the ones investigating the past. It is the past that calls us back. And as you gaze upon these impossible walls, perhaps the most important question, it's not how they were built, but what in us has been forgotten since then. There are places that don't fit on the common map of history. They seem to exist in a fold of time, where past and present observe each other in silence. Ollantaytambo is exactly like that. Officially, an Inca archaeological site. In practice, a fracture. Point in the narrative that we learn to accept without question. Once there, something changes. It's not just the altitude. It is the feeling of entering a territory that cannot be explained with ease. Situated in the sacred valley of the Andes, Ollantaytambo has been described as a fortress, temple, ceremonial city. Comfortable labels. Necessary, but insufficient. Because, when the eyes roam the carved slopes, the perfectly aligned terraces and the walls that seem to have sprouted from the mountain itself, an uneasiness arises. Everything there seems to have it was made not just to occupy space, but to dialogue with it, as if the place had been chosen and not conquered. The traditional narrative tells us that the Incas built Ollantaytambo in the 15th century, using advanced techniques for his time. And it's true. The Incas were engineers extraordinary. They dominated high-altitude agriculture, hydraulics, and ritual astronomy. But there's a detail that rarely gets the weight it deserves. Not everything in Ollantaytambo seems to belong at the same time, not at the same level of technique. There are layers. How if different hands, in different eras, had left their signature there, some quieter than others. Hike the highest areas. Observe the colossal blocks of the so-called Temple of the Sun. Compare them with clearly identifiable Inca constructions below. The difference is subtle, until it becomes blatant. Below, smaller stones, functional fittings. Above, polygonal giants carved with almost organic precision, as if the stone had been softened before being shaped. It doesn't seem like a gradual evolution. It looks like a jump. And this is where the discomfort begins. Because history, when it doesn't know how to respond, usually simplify. It was symbolic. It was ritual. It was a demonstration of power. But symbols do not explain logistics. Rituals do not explain millimetric precision. Power no explains how blocks weighing tens of tons were extracted, transported and erected in steep terrain, without wheels, without iron, without suitable draft animals. Something not closes. And when something doesn't add up, maybe it's not a mistake, maybe it's a sign. Ollantaytambo does not behave like an ordinary city. It is organized as an organism. Water flows through canals that still work. Terraces follow patterns that dialogue with the solstice. The stones seem to listen to the mountain before fitting into it. There is a quiet intelligence there, an intention that goes beyond survival or defense. Maybe that's why the place causes more than admiration. It triggers memories that don't we know where they come from. A strange, almost ancestral recognition. How if we were faced with something that was not made just to be seen, but to be felt and remembered on another level. If all this was the work of a single people, in a short period of time, we are faced with one of humanity's greatest achievements. But if it wasn't, then the question still becomes deeper and inevitable, because when observing Ollantaytambo carefully, a silent suspicion begins to emerge. What if this place isn't just a beginning, but a trace? There is a point in Ollantaytambo where reasoning slows down, not for lack of intelligence but out of excessive astonishment. It is in front of the megalithic wall of the so-called Temple of the Sun that this happens. There, the words impressive or advanced lose their meaning. Oh, what you see is not just grand. It's disconcerting. The blocks are huge. Some weigh tens of tons. They are not rectangular, simple like enlarged bricks. They are polygonal, irregular, with multiple angles that they fit together with almost intimate precision. There is no room for blades. There are no breaks. The joints are so perfect that they seem to have been calculated not only to support weight, but to dialogue with invisible forces, earthquakes, vibrations, time itself. The first reaction is usually physical. The body feels before the mind understands. There is something wrong, or perhaps too right, in that geometry. Every stone seems to have been molded specifically for that exact position, like single pieces of an impossible three-dimensional puzzle. There is no repetition, there is no obvious pattern, and yet thus everything works in absolute harmony. The most intriguing thing is not just the size, it's the finish. The contact surfaces are smooth, gentle curves that meet at complex angles. They don't seem to be the result of repeated blows, but with refined control of the form. Some fittings have curves internal, impossible to achieve with simple, rigid tools. It's as if the stone had been carved when it was still giving way. Modern engineers, when analyzing these walls, often admit discomfort, not because they are impossible, but because today they would require heavy machines, lasers, measurement, three-dimensional modeling software. And even then, the cost would be absurd. The inevitable question arises. Why so much effort? Why such precision in a world supposedly limited by simple technology? The official narrative suggests collective work, infinite patience, trial and error throughout years. But this explanation begins to fail when we look at the whole. Attempt and mistakes leave marks. Course adjustments, visible fixes. Not here. Every stone seems to have been born right, as if the project was complete before the first rock was even played. There is also the mystery of transportation. The quarries from which these blocks were extracted. They are kilometers away, crossing valleys, rivers, and uneven terrain, without wheels. No suitable draft animals. No clear records of how this was done. Drag, roll, get up. Each hypothesis raises more questions than answers. especially when considering the level of precision maintained after displacement. Another detail rarely discussed: aesthetic intentionality. These walls are not just functional, they are beautiful. There is a visual harmony that is not necessary to defense nor for support. It's as if whoever built it knew that someone, one day, I would be there watching, as if the work had been made to last, and to be recognized. When compared to other undisputed Inca structures, the differences become even greater. Evident. It's not just a variation of style, it is another constructive language, another level of mastery of the matter. This leads some researchers to suggest that the Incas did. Not they built everything, but they inherited. They restored it. They reused something much older whose origin it was lost even to them. And maybe that's why this wall bothers so much. She doesn't fit comfortably in no closed chronology. She resists labels. Stay there, motionless, while our explanations spin around trying to reach her. In front of these stones, a strange sensation arises, as if we were looking at a vestige of something greater than a specific civilization, an echo of knowledge that he left no manuals, only silent proofs, evidence that doesn't explain, just point out. And the question that echoes among the blocks, increasingly clear, is this: if that shouldn't be possible, why is it there, perfectly real? When the gaze moves away from the wall and seeks answers on the ground of history, it finds simple tools: stone hammers, diorite strikers, rudimentary chisels. That's it that traditional archaeology presents as the arsenal available to shape those colossal structures. And at first glance, it seems coherent. Ancient people, tools simple, results obtained with collective effort. But this logic starts to fail when confronted with the physical reality of the stone. Andesite and granite are not forgiving materials. They are dense, hard, resistant. Working them requires not just strength, but control, precision, consistency. With lithic tools, it is possible to break, chip, and slowly wear out. What cannot be explained with ease is how one achieves such refined contact surfaces, such internal curves, adjusted multiple angles that meet without visible play. The stone there doesn't seem just been hit. She seems to have been guided. Modern experiments have attempted to reproduce these techniques. Experimental archaeologists spent months carving blocks with tools similar to those known in the world ancient Andean. The result was honest and revealing. The marks became irregular. The fittings, approximate, functional perhaps, but very far from the perfection observed in megalithic walls. The time needed to achieve anything close would be immense, and still, repeatability would be nearly impossible. There is also the problem of invisible standardization. Each block is unique, but all comply with the same level of finish. This suggests method, process, one systematic knowledge that goes beyond improvisation. Simple tools do not produce complex results consistently without extraordinary mastery, or without something further assisting the process. Some advocate the use of abrasion with sand, water, and infinite patience, a valid technique in certain contexts. But again, the question of scale arises. We are talking about dozens of tons being molded with minimal tolerances. Abrading a face is a thing. Adjust multiple interdependent faces in 3 dimensions while maintaining alignment perfect is quite another, especially without measuring instruments advanced. Another point rarely discussed is the absence of intermediate brands. In processes long trial and error, one expects to find discarded stones, ill-fitting blocks, learning records. In Ollantaytambo, this almost doesn't exist. What you see are final results, as if the error had been eliminated even before execution. How if the project was clear from the beginning? This leads us to an uncomfortable question. What if the known tools are not the whole story? What if some of the technical knowledge simply hasn't reached us? Civilizations don't record everything. Many things are transmitted orally. Others if they lose when they are no longer understood. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, especially when the end result is before us, solid and silent. There are bold hypotheses. Some talk about stone softening techniques today considered legendary. Others suggest the use of vibrational, thermal, chemical methods. Most of these ideas are quickly dismissed due to lack of direct evidence. But maybe the problem is in the criteria. We demand proof of tools, when the biggest clue is in the effect produced. The shaped stone is the document. History tends to rely more on what it recognizes than on what it observes. If something doesn't work, fits into the accepted model, it is softened, reinterpreted, diluted. But the walls are not dilute. They remain there, defying the narrative with their massive presence. Maybe the tools don't explain why they aren't the central point. Maybe what is at stake is not what was done, but how one thought when doing it. A type of engineering that integrated mind, matter, and environment. A knowledge that did not separate intention technique. And if so, then the real mystery is not in the hands that held the tools, but in the conscience that guided them. When we accept that known tools do not explain everything, a new door opens. Opens, silent, but inevitable. The idea that knowledge does not always arise from zero, but can be inherited, preserved, or even misunderstood by those who receive it. Ollantaytambo. This possibility begins to gain weight when we realize that he does not is alone. There are echoes of the same mystery spread throughout the world. Look at the rocks of Sacsayhuaman, compared to Puma's quasi-industrial blocks, Punku, or with the silent elegance of Machu Picchu. At different altitudes, cultures, and contexts, the same disturbing pattern emerges. Giant stones, impossible fittings, precision that appears to predate the technology that supposedly produced it. Not how copies, but as variations of the same forgotten language. Official history tends to treat each site as an isolated case. Separate civilizations, independent solutions, technical coincidences. But what if they are not coincidences? And if we are looking at fragments of much older knowledge, transmitted in a partial over generations, a knowledge that survived not in texts, but in practices, repeated without full understanding of their origin. Many ancient cultures speak of before times, mythical eras, golden ages, peoples, ancestors who came before. Modern archaeology tends to treat these accounts as symbolic, but symbols are often born from real memories distorted by time. What we call myth today may be the echo of a story that has lost its details, but it maintained its essence. The Incas, for example, never claimed to be the first. In their own accounts, they spoke of ancient builders, of sacred places that already existed when they arrived. Your genius may have been less in creating out of nothing and more in recognizing, preserving, and integrate what they found. Restore, adapt, continue, as heirs to something greater than themselves. This would explain the technical differences within the same site, distinct layers of construction, clearly Inca parts coexisting with structures that appear to belong to another time, another constructive mindset. Not a linear evolution, but a overlap, like pages written by different hands in the same stone book. There is also the question of purpose. Inherited knowledge is not always completely understood. It is often repeated because it has always been this way. Rituals continue even when its original meaning is lost. Techniques are applied even when the principle that underpins them is no longer fully understood. The result can be extraordinary, and at the same time enigmatic. If this is true, then Ollantaytambo is not just an architectural masterpiece. It's a trace of transmission, a point where one civilization touched the legacy of another, where the material memory outlived intellectual memory. The stones remembered, even when the words were lost. This idea is troubling because it challenges the notion of linear progress. We prefer to believe that we are the culmination of everything that came before. But the past is not always primitive. Sometimes, he is just forgotten. Knowledge can appear, disappear, and resurface in different ways. Fragmented. Human history may be more cyclical than we like to admit. Maybe that's why these structures provoke us so much. They suggest we haven't started from scratch. That someone, at some remote moment, understood the matter in a way that we are still trying to relearn, not necessarily with machines, but with a different perception of nature, weight, shape, the fit between visible and invisible. What if that knowledge wasn't destroyed, just dormant? Maybe it's there, waiting to be recognized again, not as technology to be copied, but as a memory to be integrated, because inheriting knowledge is not just repeat it. It is one day being ready to understand it again. And that brings us to the next, even deeper, question. And if these stones were not shaped just to support structures, but to align something within us? There is a moment when the mystery stops being just technical and becomes intimate, when we realize that it's not just about moving rocks, cutting angles, or overcoming gravity. In Ollantaytambo, geometry seems to carry intention, not just structurally but symbolic, as if every angle, every slope, every proportion had been thought out to something beyond matter. Look carefully at the megalithic blocks. They don't follow simple straight lines. There are calculated asymmetries, angles that escape the obvious, fittings that distribute tension almost organic way. Nothing seems random, but nothing seems too rigid either. It is a living geometry, flexible, adaptive, as if imitating principles found in nature itself. Mountains, crystals, human bodies. Ancient cultures did not separate mathematics from spirituality. For them, numbers are not, they were just quantities, but qualities. Proportions were doors. Geometry was a universal language that connected heaven, earth, and consciousness. When a temple was aligned, it wasn't just with the sun, it was with the rhythm of life. When a stone was fitted, no, it was just to support weight. It was to harmonize forces. In Ollantaytambo, many alignments dialogue with astronomical events, solstices, solar cycles, relationships between shadow and light that are repeated precisely throughout the year. This suggests deep observation of the sky, yes, but also something more subtle, an attempt of synchronizing human space with greater time, a cosmic time. This same logic appears in several ancient sites around the world: pyramids, stone circles, megalithic temples. They all share a silent obsession with proportion and orientation, as if the builders knew that shape influences mind, that space shapes the experience. What to live, walk, or meditate on certain environments change the internal state of the human being. And here a hypothesis rarely discussed in depth arises. What if these structures were designed not just to be seen, but to be felt? How instruments, like resonators, as architectures of consciousness. Modern neuroscience is beginning to recognize that environments profoundly influence our mental state. Height, symmetry, light, texture, sound. Everything affects the brain. Now imagine a people who understood this intuitively, or scientifically in another way, shape. A people who built spaces capable of inducing states of contemplation, focus, reverence, not out of blind belief, but out of experiential knowledge. Perhaps this is why many people report feelings that are difficult to explain when being in these places. An unusual stillness, an internal alignment, a souvenir print no clear content, as if something was rearranging itself inside, speechless. It's not proof scientific, but it is a human given, and human data also tells stories. Ollantaytambo's geometry may have served as a bridge between the physical and the psychic, between the external and internal world. Stones, in this context, would not just be block structural, but anchor points, milestones of a forgotten technology of perception. This would explain why so much effort was invested in something that goes beyond functionality, why precision surpasses practical necessity, why beauty is present even where few would see it. It wasn't ostentatious. It was coherence with a greater principle. Perhaps the builders knew that the real work was not just outside, but inside whoever crossed that space. That architecture could awaken something, remember something, harmonize something that, over time, fragments. If this sounds too abstract, it's worth remembering. Our own modern architecture influences behavior, productivity, emotion. The difference is that today we do it in the unconscious. Perhaps in the past this was done with full intention. And if so, then Ollantaytambo is not just a technical or historical enigma. It's a silent invitation, a reminder in stone that knowledge is not just an accumulation of data, is alignment between form, mind, and spirit. And this leads us to an inevitable question. What happens when we forget how to read the spaces we ourselves have inherited? There is a point in contemplation when the questions stop. Not because they were answered, but because they became unnecessary. In front of these ancient stones, the silence begins to speak. A thick, almost audible silence, which does not come from the absence of sound, comes from the presence of something that remains. The stones don't explain. They remain. And by remaining, they bear witness. When the wind passes between the blocks, it finds no gaps. Slide, as if the wall breathed together with the mountain. Time has tried to infiltrate there for centuries. Rain, sun, tremors, and failed. There are no obvious cracks, no dramatic collapses. There are calm resistance, a stillness that doesn't challenge, just observes. And that causes something rare in the observer: humility. Because we are a noisy civilization, we produce quick answers, immediate theories, comfortable explanations. Not the stones. They don't compete for narrative. They do not require belief. They just exist. And in this silent existence they expose our anxiety to close mysteries before understanding them. Maybe that's why so many visitors report the same feeling when stopping there for a few minutes. More than normal. An internal slowdown, as if the body understood something that the mind still tries to translate. It's not ecstasy. It's not fear. It's recognition. A type of memory without images, without words, without a clear story, just the certainty that what matters. The stones bear the marks of time, but they do not look tired. On the contrary, there are a strange dignity in them, as if they knew they would survive interpretations, passengers. Generations came and went. Empires rose and fell. Languages disappeared. And they continued there, supporting the weight of the mountain and the human oblivion. The silence of the stones also reveals something about us. It reveals how much we have unlearned listen. Not everything that communicates uses voice. Not all knowledge is organized into sentences. Some truths only present themselves when the internal noise subsides, when the rush give in, when we accept not to dominate meaning, but to live with it. There are those who say that stones keep memories, not memory as a file, but as resonance. What happened there left marks that were not visible but noticeable. Intentions, rhythms, states of consciousness. If this sounds too poetic, it's worth remembering. Even physics modern art talks about vibration, fields, information beyond the visible. Maybe what we call mystical is just science that has not yet been translated. When touching one of these stones, the sensation is not cold. It's density, as if the time had been compacted there, and for a moment past and present coexist. No as dates, but as presence. This doesn't prove anything, but it transforms those who feel it. And transformation is also a type of evidence, albeit a personal one. The silence of the stones confronts us with an uncomfortable question. What if part of human knowledge was not lost through destruction but through disinterest? And if, when prioritize only what is measurable, we leave behind more subtle ways of understanding the world? The stones remained. We are the ones who change the way we listen. Maybe they're not expecting us to decipher their technical secrets. Maybe they are just reminding us of something simpler and more difficult at the same time: the ability to be present, to observe without dominating, accepting that not everything needs to be explained to be true. In the end, the greatest lesson of these walls may not be in engineering, nor in chronology, nor in origin. It may be in the silence they impose, a silence that does not erase his questions, just matures them. And when we move away, taking this silence with us, a new restlessness arises. If the stones still remember, what have we forgotten to hear? When a mystery remains too long, the question stops being, what isn't we know, and it becomes because we don't know. In the case of these megalithic walls, the lack of responses is not just due to technical difficulty. There is something more subtle about game, something human, institutional, emotional. History is not written with facts alone. It is shaped by invisible limits to what we are willing to accept. Modern archaeology was born with a noble commitment to organize the past with method and rigor. But like every human structure, it also inherited fears. Fear of error, fear of breaking consensus, fear of opening doors that can no longer be closed. When a discovery threatens the established timeline, the most common reaction is not to its curiosity, it's caution. And caution, when it goes on too long, turns into resistance. Questioning these walls does not mean denying the talent of known civilizations. For contrary, it means taking them seriously enough to admit that we may know less than that we imagine. But this has a cost. Admitting deep gaps in knowledge requires rewriting books, revising CVs, abandoning certainties that sustained entire careers. Not everyone is willing to pay that price. There is also the problem of excessive specialization. The past is studied in compartments. Engineering here, religion there, astronomy somewhere else. But structures as these do not belong to a single field. They require an integrated vision. And when no one owns the problem completely, it ends up being suspended, recognized, but not in depth. Furthermore, we live in a culture that values quick responses. Long mysteries bother. They don't fit into hour-long documentaries or explanations simplified. They require patience, continuous doubt, intellectual humility. They demand to say, "No, we know," without rushing to fill the void. And the emptiness for many is unbearable. There is also a more delicate issue, the fear that certain discoveries will destabilize our narrative about progress. We like to believe that human knowledge grows linearly, always forward. But what these stones suggest is something different. That knowledge can emerge, disappear, and reappear in a fragmented way. What the past may have been, in some respects, more sophisticated than we suppose. This idea, it hurts modern pride. Therefore, the mystery is often softened. Questions are rephrased until they fit in the available answers. Instead of asking, "How is this possible?" ask, "How could this have been done?" The difference is subtle, but crucial. The first opens new paths. The second limits. None of this implies bad faith. Most researchers work honestly, but entire systems can become conservative without realizing it. What starts as method becomes dogma. What was a hypothesis became definitive truth, and the unknown begins to be treated as a threat, not an opportunity. Perhaps the enigma of these walls remains precisely because they require something rare, a change of posture, not just new tools or new theories, but a new internal layout to hear what does not confirm expectations. To accept that, human nature can be more complex, less comfortable, and much deeper than we imagined. Until this happens, the stones remain there. Don't rush. Do not require consensus. They just wait, as if they knew that the time needed was not theirs, is ours. Time to ask questions. The time to accept the mystery without reduce it. Perhaps the real barrier is not in the past, but in the present. Not in the absence of data, but the difficulty of looking at it without legacy filters. Because deep down, answering this riddle would require more than technical intelligence. It would require courage. And this leads us to the last mirror of this journey. What do these walls reveal, after all, about who we are today? At some point in the journey, the mystery stops pointing outward and begins to reflect inside. Standing before the walls of Ollantaytambo, we realize that the central question, it's not just who built it or how it was made. The most uncomfortable question is another. What does this riddle reveal about us? We are a civilization that measures value by immediate utility. We ask, why does it work? How much does it cost? How long does it take? And when something doesn't meet these criteria, we tend to dismiss it as curious but irrelevant. Stones, however, resist this framing. They do not require use. They ask for presence. They don't offer quick answers. They offer depth. Maybe that's why they disconcert us so much, because they force us to recognize limits. Limits of language, of chronology, of certainty. And recognizing limits is not comfortable for a culture that has become accustomed to dominating, classifying, accelerating. Walls don't accelerate. They remain. And by remaining, they place us in front of a silent comparison. How long do our works last? How many generations will the structures that do we rise today? How many centuries have the ideas that we defend so much survived? Conviction? The stones do not compete with us, but they observe us. And on that observation, work like a mirror that does not judge but reveals. It reveals our rush to conclude, our anxiety to close mysteries, our difficulty in living with, "I don't know." It also reveals something more subtle, the disconnection between knowledge and wisdom. We know a lot. We accumulate data. We master techniques. But we don't always know why we do what we do or who we build for. Ollantaytambo suggests another logic, a logic in which effort exceeds need immediate, where form honors time, in which the construction dialogues with something bigger than the generation that built it. This is not nostalgia for the past. It is an invitation to responsibility for the future. Perhaps these walls were made to last because their builders thought on long scales, in cycles, not deadlines, in legacy, not in income. If this is true, then the biggest contrast isn't technological, it's philosophical. It's not about what they had, but about how they thought. When we recognize this, something clicks inside us. Mystery stops being a flaw and becomes corrected and becomes a silent teacher. He teaches us that not all advancement is linear, that forgetting is also part of the story, and that remembering does not mean going back but integrate what was lost in a mature way. When we see ourselves reflected in these stones, we realize that the question, how was it made? It's just the first level. The deepest level asks, what kind of humanity do we want to be? One that builds only for now, or one who agrees to work for times you won't see? Perhaps this is why the enigma persists. Not because there is a lack of data, but because the response requires transformation. It demands that we change the way we look, ask questions, inhabit the world. And this cannot be resolved with theories. It can be resolved with consciousness. In the end, the stones remain silent, but the mirror has already fulfilled its role. It showed not just a dark past, but a restless present, and prepared the ground for the last reflection, the most delicate of all. Because, if this enigma still calls us, maybe it's not meant to be resolved, but to be crossed. At the end of this journey, something settles down, not because the mystery has been solved, but because he found his place. Ollantaytambo remains there, motionless, crossing eras without asking permission from our understanding. And perhaps this is his greatest teaching. Not everything exists to be explained. Some things are there to remind us. Remember that humanity did not begin with us, that before us there were other looks, other ways of feeling the world, other intelligences that do not fit perfectly into our current models. The stones do not tell this story with words but with presence. And presence is an ancient language which only reveals itself when silence is respected. Perhaps the real enigma was never technical. Maybe it was never about tools, dates, or construction methods. Perhaps the enigma is internal. A mad soft way to recover something we lost along the way. The ability to hear the time, to honor the mystery, to recognize that the unknown is not a threat. It is a portal. When we look at these walls with humility, something changes. The need to mastering gives way to the desire to understand. Anxiety for answers gives way to contemplation. And in that space, something essential happens. We remember that we are part of a story much bigger than our own lives. If this message touched something in you, don't dismiss it. Allow her to stay. What mature? Let it echo. Sign up and follow us. Not out of habit, but out of affinity. Because maybe this journey is not about ancient stones, but about inner paths that the soul still recognizes. And before you leave, take with you one last question. Not to answer now, but to save. And if what we call the past is not behind us, but dormant, waiting for the moment when we are ready to remember,